The LA Kings are about to play their first preseason game, and we've got three things and three players to watch. Plus, it's a Kings Feedback Friday on this edition of Locked On LA Kings.
You are Locked On Kings, your daily podcast on the Los Angeles Kings, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, Kings fans, welcome to Locked On LA Kings, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thanks for making Locked On LA Kings your first listen every day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcast. We'd love for you to leave us a positive comment on Apple Podcasts if you're a fan of the show. And we're also on YouTube. Please like and subscribe if you're enjoying this content. I'm Eddie Garcia, your host of Locked On LA Kings. I've worked in sports media for almost 30 years, 20 plus years at the Fox Sports Radio Network. I'm also co-host of the Puck Podcast. It's a weekly NHL review show that's been putting out content for the past 17 years, and a passionate LA Kings fan for 30 years. This episode is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, official sportsbook of Locked On. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn to get started. Well, it is here. The LA Kings preseason opener, but not just any preseason opener, a historic game, the first game for the NHL ever played in the Southern Hemisphere. The LA Kings are getting ready to take on the Arizona Coyotes in two global series matchups in Melbourne, Australia, Friday and Saturday night, LA time. These are obviously the first steps for this LA Kings team to get started. What we all hope is going to be a memorable season, because this is not only, like I said, the start of the preseason, but a historic season as well. And hopefully that will just be one of the footnotes on the way to this entire season, preseason, regular season, and postseason being something that we are all very excited about in the end. So we obviously are going to see something very similar to what the Kings are going to put out on the ice for opening night. And that's not always the case for a preseason game, but because this is a special game, because the NHL has requested that the LA Kings put out basically their number one lineup for the most part, we're going to see the best players out there for the Kings. Like I said, it should be a lineup very similar to what we see on opening night. So this does make this preseason game a little bit different. Obviously, they're looking to grow the game. They want this Australian audience to see the best stars that both the Kings and the Arizona Coyotes have to offer. Obviously, the Kings being a playoff team, a little bit more star power on their lineup. So again, it is a unique preseason opener in many ways, not only the location, but the circumstances surrounding the game as well. So I thought maybe three things to watch for Friday and Saturday, and we'll recap these and revisit these on Monday's show to see how things worked out. So how about three things to watch for the LA Kings in this preseason opener? I think first and foremost, what does the penalty kill look like? Now, the Arizona Coyotes aren't exactly the Edmonton Oilers or the Colorado Avalanche when it comes to power plays. But regardless right now of who the opponent is, I think obviously the LA Kings are going to be very focused on what they do on the penalty kill. And for us, what do we see that is different on the penalty kill? Obviously, this is just the first step of it. It's a work in progress, but we all know from a team standpoint, I think this is probably the biggest area that the Kings need to address from last year. It was one of the things that I think if they can improve the penalty kill like they improved the power play last year, it'll go a long way in the LA Kings doing ultimately what they want and what we want, and that is having postseason success. It was the biggest thing from a team standpoint that the Kings did not do well last year. It was called out by GM Rob Blake. It was an obvious area of improvement. And head coach Todd McClellan said in his exit interview after last season when the playoffs ended that it was their summer project. So let's see what the summer project has yielded. Now, again, they haven't had any training camp practices to speak of, really. They had a couple of, workouts down in Australia, two to be exact. They had a third one, but it was supposedly, I'm not even sure if they actually played it because of something we'll talk about in a little bit, but the third one was kind of a public session. So I don't even know if that was a real workout. Maybe it was a little more of a scrimmage type of situation. But anyway, like I said, what in these first two preseason games with the regulars pretty much on the ice, what is the penalty kill going to look like? How is it different? Who's playing on it? and how successful is it going to be? I think number two, something else to watch. Who's going to be playing on the third pairing defensively, and possibly how are they going to play together? Andreas Englund, a newcomer, is on the trip, and I think he's probably going to start game one. You probably know a little bit about Tobias Bjornfoot, former number one pick for the LA Kings, who is also in the mix. Both of those guys battling to see who's going to earn that spot on the third pairing on the left side. Obviously, with the injury to Brandt Clark, which we're going to update in a minute, that opens the door up for Jordan Spence on the right side. I would be shocked if he doesn't start, especially considering he was born in Australia. He's one of the players that's being focused on in this event. I'm sure we'll see him on the right side. And what kind of chemistry do those players have together? Again, it's just one game. It's very early on, but I do want to see what kind of first impression, especially Andreas Englund, gives us as Kings fans and gives the coaching staff of the LA Kings. Again, he's battling for a spot on the Kings roster, so I would expect him to be putting his best foot forward if he's on the ice for this opening game. And then if the second game, if it's Tobias Bjornfoot, obviously him doing the same. There's nothing wrong with having healthy competition on your team, guys battling for spots, and hopefully those two guys push each other all season long to play the best hockey that they possibly can. And I think the third thing to watch in these first two preseason opening games is how does the third line look with Pierre-Luc Dubois at center? What kind of chemistry does that group have with a new center on that look? So Kevin Fiala is supposedly going to be playing with Pierre-Luc Dubois, and Arthur Kaliev could be playing with them as well. Could be, well, we'll just have to wait and see. But it looks like it's going to be Pierre-Luc Dubois, Kevin Fiala, and I think Arthur Kaliev on that third pairing. So we'll see how that goes and what that looks like, because that could be a very interesting third line. As far as the three players to watch, I think it starts with whoever's in net. Now, it could be Phoenix Copley in game one, Cam Talbot in game two. That's what I would expect. But the expectation is these two guys are going to be 1A, 1B in some sort of situation, sharing the net all season long if things go according to plan. Now, we saw last year, things don't always go according to plan. We thought it was going to be Jonathan Quick and Cal Peterson. Obviously, it was for a while. Things changed, and in the end, it turned out to be Phoenix Copley. Who knows? Maybe it's David Rittich. Maybe David Rittich is the guy who turns out to be the number one goalie. It's something that, again, we're all going to be watching to see, but the expectation is going into this, it's Phoenix Copley and it's Cam Talbot. So who's the starting goalies and how do they look for these first two preseason games? Other players to watch, I mentioned him, Andreas Englund. I think he's probably the one player I'm most interested in watching other than the guy we're going to mention in a moment. But like I said, he's in the running to play on that left side. This is an audition for him. This is his first chance to impress the coaching staff, to show what he can do. He's supposedly a more physical player. Well, not supposedly. His reputation is he's bigger, stronger, and he's more physical. That's what his calling card is. So he needs to show that while also staying disciplined and not taking penalties. We talked about the Kings penalty kill. The best way to avoid your penalty kill, giving up a goal, is to stay out of the penalty box. So can Andreas Englund be effectively aggressive? Can he play smart and still be a physical presence out there, and obviously play very responsible defensively? If you are not out of position, if you don't have to use your stick because you're in the right place, then obviously that cuts down on the type of penalties that you take as well. So I think Andreas Englund, one of the guys in the spotlight, definitely for me. And then the third guy is pretty obvious, Pierre-Luc Dubois. How is he going to be out there on the face-off circle? What does the biggest offseason acquisition for the LA Kings look like in his first couple of games in an LA Kings uniform? Some people don't like me bringing this up all the time, but I'm sorry. He does have a reputation of being a guy who sometimes can take shifts off or games off. So, anytime you start a new job, right, you want to make a good first impression. Well, this is a chance for Pierre-Luc Dubois to silence any of those issues that some people may have thought he had in his past two locations. Come out, put your best foot forward, show that you're happy to be in a new place, want to impress your new coach, your new teammates, and your new fans. And he doesn't have to come out and be a superstar, but just come out and play hard, do your thing, show off the talent that made you a player that the LA Kings wanted to acquire and come in and help the Kings get to the next level. We are going to get to, this is a Friday fan feedback show. So we're going to get to some YouTube comments, get to some emails here in a minute. And I do have an update on Brandt Clarke that I want to share. We will get into all that in just a minute here on Locked on LA Kings, your team every day. Hey, this episode of Locked on LA Kings brought to you by Birddogs. What are Birddogs, you ask? Well, Birddogs are shorts that have the underwear built in them. And I know you may ask yourself, why would I want to wear that? Well, the answer is pretty easy, because they are super comfortable and they look great. Honestly, how often does something that looks good really feels good as well? It is the perfect combination. Your Birddogs, you can wear these shorts or these pants out to dinner, out to a nice casual dinner, because they look good. You could also wear them to work out in, to do yard work around the house, because they stretch, they are comfortable, and they can move along with you. And once you try them, you're going to wonder why you'd never heard of these before. So go to birddogs.com/LockedOnNHL. And when you enter the promo code LockedOnNHL, they'll throw in a Birddogs water bottle. Again, that is Birddogs, BIRDDOGS.com. Enter the promo code LockedOnNHL for your free gift. One more news item to pass along before we get into the emails. The NHL, I mentioned things to watch, by the way, things to watch. Hopefully, we won't have to watch the playing conditions in Australia. There were some concerns with the ice surface. They had to cancel a practice session at Rod Laver Arena because the ice was not up to standard. Now, this is an NHL production. This is not some folks down under trying to figure out how to freeze ice. This is all put on by the NHL. It's the same people that put on these winter classics and these stadium series outdoor games. So they know what they're doing. They've been doing it for a long, long time. So it's not an issue with people not knowing what they're doing. It just, apparently they've had some issues. But later on in the day, earlier today, I guess, Los Angeles time, they reported that whatever the issues were have been fixed. So obviously the one thing that could really take away from this event is somebody getting hurt. And especially somebody getting hurt because the ice conditions aren't up to par. So hopefully that is not going to be an issue for either the LA Kings or the Arizona Coyotes. And also an update on Brandt Clarke, the rookie star defenseman for the Kings, obviously was unable to travel to Australia because of an injury. Found out from friend of the show and the LA Kings insider, Zach Dooley, exactly how he got hurt, because the Kings didn't have any kind of, scrimmages before he was announced that he was hurt. And then he, unless he was injured in development camp, it didn't reveal it. Turns out that he was at some NHL rookie orientation event in Washington, D.C., and took an awkward crash into the boards and suffered a shoulder injury. Again, not expected to be serious. No contact for about a week or a week and a half, which has already, had, 6-7 days go by. GM Rob Blake saying that they expect Clarke to be back up on the ice, full participant in practice when the preseason games come up next week. The LA Kings have preseason games against Vegas, Anaheim, and San Jose, and the expectation is that Brandt Clarke will be in the lineup for at least one of those games, maybe more. So it seems to be a positive update on Kings rookie defenseman Brandt Clarke. Let's get into some emails. This one comes from Scott in Simi Valley, who's a frequent emailer. He says, "Hey, Eddie, great job fitting in the content on your busy show. Your comments on Eric Portillo's first partial rookie tournament with the Kings wasn't a complete surprise. My son, who is who's in med school at the University of Michigan, traveled to see Portillo and the University of Michigan in the Frozen Fury tournament. Fury tournament. Actually, it's the Frozen Four tournament, if I could talk, against Quinnipiac down in Tampa Bay in April. And he says he wasn't too impressed. Neither was I after catching the highlights. If you watch the highlights, the games were played in April. You'll see Portillo did make several nice saves, but was slow to steal the post afterwards. Quinnipiac was able to bank in 2 off him and nearly a third for the win. Anyone can have a couple of bad games. As I see it, he made some great saves, but in the humble opinions of my son and I, we don't see Portillo as the Kings' future messiah in goal. I hope what's wrong with him can improve with some coaching. I do think Talbot and Copley can play well in front of a good defense, and Rittich seems like a pretty fair emergency option as well. I'm fairly confident in these three if the defense and penalty kill are strong, but would still prefer the Kings upgrade. There aren't a lot of great goalkeepers available within the Kings cap constraints, but we'll see. The Kings recently hired a new goalie coach. In my humble opinion, it's time to think about giving him some new pupils. So again, that was from Scott in Simi Valley, who's had a bit of a look at Eric Portillo, the young goaltender out of the University of Michigan, and not too impressed with him. And well, I wasn't too impressed with him in his first look at rookie camp, but again, he was a standout at the University of Michigan, one of the best college programs in the nation. They had a lot of success with him in net. So there is that on his resume. So we shall see, though. Obviously, how he does as a pro is what we're more interested in. Our next email comes from Matthew Henderson. He says, I don't understand why people say Quinton Byfield is going to be a bust. I compare him to somebody like Tage Thompson, where he has a rough beginning, but when the breakout comes, he's a great player. I also think it's the coaching issue also, because for Thompson, it was a breakout season when the new coach came in. So with the idea of Todd getting fired, if a new coach can spark confidence in Byfield, then I think his time has come. I've somewhat made the Tage Thompson comparison as well. I don't think that Quinton Byfield will ever be that kind of goal scorer, but because they're both big, lanky kind of guys, because they both are guys that were, thought of that would take a little longer to ripen, so to speak. And because Tage Thompson started off very, very slowly, was not putting up the numbers, and then exploded once he went to Buffalo in a trade from St. Louis. Again, I don't think Byfield will be that kind of explosive scorer, but I do think that there are some natural comparisons between those two guys as far as high draft picks, body type similar, taking a little bit longer to gel, but once they do get, into becoming, those full-time NHL players, they are impactful players. So we shall see. Next email comes from Eric. He says, just writing because I saw your Twitter post about trying the Vegemite spread the other day. I got to tell you, your reaction was hilarious, and your comment of not good and your face tells the whole story of the first time I tried it 20-something years ago. It was the funniest thing I've seen in a while. Thanks for a good laugh. Yeah, if you follow the show on Twitter, one of the Kings reporters, what is it? I'm blanking on his name right now. Dennis Bernstein. He had posted a bowl of Vegemite packets that I guess they were available for like a lunch for the media or something to use if you want. And the caption was on the picture was like, should I try this? And I responded, don't do it, with a video of my trip to Australia a few years back where I tried Vegemite on toast. And I did not enjoy my experience with that one bit. So if you're on Twitter at LockedOnLAKings, you can check out that amusing video. Our final email comes from Ed in Tamecky, who says, I'm pleased that you're back on a full schedule. Hope you and the wife had some fun during your break. Heard your podcast about McClellan on his last year of his contract. The team has to go at least to the second round of the playoffs, or he does not deserve to keep his job. So this year, if Kopi or Kempe or Doughty get a serious injury and lose a lot of playing time, and the defense plays like crap, like they did for the beginning of the year, or the two goalies do a lousy job, then get another coach and get rid of McClellan. Like it is all his fault. The team only made it to the first round or less. Then the credit for winning the two cups in 2012 and 2014 goes to Sutter, even though he has no class and acted like a disrespectful jerk to the media on TV after every game. How unprofessional. And the players evidently despised him as well because of the way he treated them with his tough guy attitude. Did you ever hear a player say that he was a great coach and the guys would skate through a wall for him to show respect for him? Nah, never once in the years he was here did they come out. The only things the players said when asked about Daryl was a good coach is that he was tough but a good coach. Did the players that played for the whole season, and some with a lot of pain and sacrifice for their teammates, do they credit him for winning the cup, or was it really the coach winning the cup? I suppose this year, if the Kings win the cup, I suppose it will be McClellan who won the cup. Actually, Blake, the coaches, the players, the decision makers working together would be the reason that the team won. Look, as far as Daryl Sutter, I have said many times I was not a big fan of his personally, but the results were the results, and he won 2 Stanley Cups with the Kings, and that's all that matters. I didn't like the way Daryl Sutter treated the media and kind of the fans as well, because I think the media is kind of a conduit to the fans where he wouldn't really say anything about the team or about what was going on with the team. He just didn't want to talk to the media. And he is a tough guy to play for. If you followed what was the drama with the Calgary Flames last year, the players pretty much quit on him and said they want him fired, and they ended up firing him. So there's no secret that he can be a tough guy to play for. It doesn't make him a bad person, by the way, but he's a very demanding coach, and it obviously worked out for a while very well with the LA Kings. But he's also one of those coaches where it just long term, you could see players at some point getting tired of it. And like I said, he's tough, he's demanding. He's not supposed to be the player's friend, by the way. He's supposed to be someone who does push them to get results. So I've never said Daryl Sutter wasn't a great coach. I'm sure he's a Hall of Fame coach, frankly, if you look at the numbers he's put up and winning a couple of Stanley Cups. But he is, like I said, he's tough to play for. And certain players, I think they would admit they didn't like him. They didn't like playing for him. But I also think those players would also admit that he had a big hand in them winning 2 Stanley Cups and helped them to get the job done. And there are certainly players who do like him and do appreciate and respect everything that he did while he's with the LA Kings. We're going to get to some YouTube comments here in a second, but I want to remind you to check out Locked On NHL, your daily podcast covering all things going on in the NHL. I'm sure they're going to be talking on Monday's show about the Global Series games involving the LA Kings. That's Locked On NHL, wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube. All right, we got some YouTube comments to get to before we close out this week's show. This one comes from Aquaman01. He says, for how many years is our roster pretty much set with limited spots available, given that we do have some great prospects in the pipeline, like Laferriere, Pinelli, Chromiak, Spence, etc.? Do you see the Kings having space for them after next season? And if we do keep them playing in Ontario or trade them for theoretically the only need which is left, which is a shutdown goalie, what would it take to get Swayman from the Boston Bruins in terms of a trade chip? I mean, look, the Kings pipeline, if you want to call it that, they're young group of players, not as deep as it once was, but they're still very talented players there. I think there are a couple of guys that can come in and play some very, very good roles for the Kings in the near future. But are any of these guys top 6 forwards? Not sure about that. Pinelli, Laferriere, maybe. There's still some growing to do. As far as trading some of these guys to get a goalie like a Jeremy Swayman from Boston, it would need to be a package of picks and prospects. So you could send a couple of the guys that you mentioned out, but the Kings would have to include probably some high draft picks as well. So I think I don't think there's just the talent alone. Some of these guys, as if you want to talk about them being trade pieces, I don't think they in them of themselves are good enough to go out and get a really big time quality goalie, but a combination of prospects and draft picks could get the job done. This one comes from, let's see, Johnny Embers 9520. Hey, Eddie, I'm a recent subscriber and now an everyday listener, and that makes you an everydayer. He says, I love your objective and fair approach to our favorite underachievers. I've been a Kings fan since the 80s. My grandfather took me to games, and I got hooked watching Dave Taylor and Jim Fox play. I'm wondering why there is a question of whether we will be using Brandt Clark or Jordan Spence. I think that Spence is an amazing player, but I've always thought that he's too small and gets pushed around in the NHL level on defense. That being said, why not try him out as a winger? As a defenseman, he will be a great skater and not a defensive liability. I guess he's saying playing forward defensively. Not only that, but he is never afraid to just shoot. That shot first mentality has always been a thorn in our sides. We lose too many scoring chances looking for the perfect play too many times. Having Spence as a winger defenseman gives us many options for a defenseman gets hurt during a game. It would also give us an additional piece to our penalty kill for blocking shots. Rolling with 7D options in the lineup would not hurt. The Oilers did it against our Kings. With our lack of wing depth, I think it would be worth looking at. Changing roles worked out well for Brent Burns. We need as many new players who think the modern game is possible to stay competitive in our stacked division. Would love your take on this idea. Well, that is certainly an outside the box idea, Johnny. I haven't heard anyone bring that kind of thing up. It is very rare. You mentioned Brent Burns did do it. He moved from defense to, or from forward to defense, and vice versa a little bit. Dustin Bufflin was another guy that comes to mind. That was played not too long ago, who did some forward and did some defense as well. But I've never heard Jordan Spence's name being brought up in that type of role. And he is a smaller defenseman. But I honestly, look, the way the NHL is going, it's a speed game. It's a puck moving game. So I don't really look at that as being that big of an issue. With Jordan Spence, if he can do the things he does offensively, if he can move the puck, I still think he can be a very effective defenseman at his size. Cale Makar is not a very big player. And look, Jordan Spence doesn't have Cale Makar's skills, but the point is you can have a smaller type defenseman be very effective if he can play himself positionally well, if he can get into passing lanes, into shooting lanes, that kind of thing. And more importantly, like you said, he does have an offensive upside, and he's a good puck mover and a good skater. So I don't think there's any talk of him transitioning to forward, but hey, it's an interesting idea. Our final comment comes from Dominic Ephraim 3088 from YouTube. Hey, Eddie, I know you have your heart set on Doobie being the second line center, Pierre-Luc Dubois, but I've always believed he is intended to be the third line center. His line can get hot at times, and Danault's line could have struggles at times, but if you follow my reasoning here, I think it will make sense. Kopi and Danault's lines have proven they can handle just about any of the team's top lines on most nights. Fiala and Dubois pose a mismatch on the third line because they'll face more bottom six matchups. The opposition can shorten their bench and double shift their top six, but that means that they will be more tired once they face Kopi again. Our fourth line just has to make whatever they match up and skate. If they can make their number one line skate for 40 seconds, and the next time their number one line comes out, you have a fresh Kopi, Danault, or Dubois line waiting for them, then they are in trouble. If the opposition starts playing their third and fourth lines to rest their top six, the Kings will eat most teams' bottom six alive. I think regardless of who that third line is, I think your point is well taken. I think that's what the Kings are banking on. That's what they're relying on, that whoever that third line is will be the difference in games, and the matchup will favor the LA Kings. So whether it ends up being the Danault line or the Pierre-Luc Dubois line, maybe it doesn't matter. I just think when you make the investment financially that you do in a Pierre-Luc Dubois and a Kevin Fiala, it's hard to have them on your third line. Maybe that turns out to be the case. Maybe they start the season like that, and we'll see how it develops. But just looking at it again from a money standpoint and what you've invested, I think ultimately we'll see Pierre-Luc Dubois and Kevin Fiala playing on the second line. But we shall see. I think your point, though, the point you're making is very accurate and very well taken. All right, that is going to do it for this show. Looking forward, obviously, to seeing the LA Kings on the ice in their two preseason games. Obviously, for the feedback portion of this show, because we talked about a little bit about the preseason openers as well. Thank you all who took the time to email. Thank you to everyone who took the time to comment on the YouTube episodes. As I always say every Friday, this show literally is not possible without your participation. So thank you, whether I read your comments or not. Thank you very much for all the feedback. I do read all the comments, so I really appreciate that. And it helps the algorithm as well when you post comments on the episodes. So really appreciate that. If you want to send me an email at any time for a feedback show or for anything else, the email address is lockedoneddie@gmail.com, EDDIE. You can also post your comments if you're watching on YouTube in the comment section below. Always appreciate that. For you everydayers, those of you that listen and watch Locked On LA Kings every day, coming up next week, Monday, we'll have a recap of the preseason games on Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, because the Kings have most of their AHL type players, so to speak, ready to play Sunday in Anaheim against the Ducks. So the Kings actually have 3 preseason games, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. We'll talk about all 3 of those games on Monday's show, mostly the 2 games in Melbourne, and answer some of those questions about what to watch and who to watch in those first 2 games for the LA Kings. We're going to have some special guests coming up next week. We'll see if we can't get another rival report in, and also see if Zach Dooley, the Kings insider, who is in Australia covering this, the Global Series firsthand, will join us and tell us what he saw down there in Australia, both with the Kings and just kind of from, a touristy standpoint as well. We'll get his insights on that. And then we'll have another Friday fan feedback show next Friday as we continue to get closer to the 2023-24 NHL season. We'd love you to stay interactive with the show by following us on Twitter and Instagram. We are at Locked On LA Kings. I'm Eddie Garcia. Thank you as always for listening and watching this episode of Locked On LA Kings, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. We will talk to you coming up on Monday. Have a great weekend. And as always, go Kings go.